I'm excited to finally create an episode as I'm putting something back together rather than taking apart. I didn't have a lot of footage of the car before I started removing the undercoating, so all I have are still images and a handful of random videos. Hopefully this will get the point across. The chassis was pretty dirty. As you can see, the asphalt-based undercoating was pretty much everywhere and caked up very thick. Decades of dirt, grime, and grease. No corner left untouched. There really isn't a great way to remove it. The best method that I found was mechanically heating up the asphalt and then scraping it with various tools. Some tools were made out of kitchen utensils such as knives, spoons, and scrapers. The star of the show was a regular old 1-inch utility knife. The co-star was a butter knife with the tip squared off. The modified butter knife worked pretty good for narrow corners. The process took forever. Admittedly, the process was frustrating and just dragged on and on. Every time I thought I had the chassis close, I found more areas that needed a ton of attention. And the more I took off, the worse everything else looked, so I scraped. Most of this was captured as a proper time lapse, so I really don't have audio. This is kind of a deviation between most of my content. I typically don't like music or narration, but there was nothing else in this, so we're going to try something new. Eventually, when it got down to primer, I used standard metalworking tools, wire wheel, angle grinders. 3M makes a really nice bristle disc. That's some sort of composite with little plastic fingers. It does a great job. Very expensive. This is the detail work. I'm trying to really get into the small areas and get to bare metal everywhere. It was the cracks and crevices where I was worried about the legacy asphalt undercoating interfering with the epoxy primer. While I'm here, I might as well go ahead and do some chassis reinforcements. So this was the Kreitz chassis reinforcement kit. You basically just weld up a plate on the rear as well as one under the seat member. The trick with this is the car needs to be loaded as it would have been on the suspension. So I had to take it off the rotisserie and then support the car where the load points would have been with the suspension on the chassis. So I had to take it off the rotisserie and then support the car where the load points would have been with the suspension on the chassis to not artificially bow or arch anything. I did the best I could. Obviously, as you know, I'm just some guy in the garage, so we'll see if this was an effective strategy when I try to mount the doors. I really don't want to grind these off. Even though it doesn't exactly look like it, there was pretty good penetration on these welds. I had to dial up the wire feed fairly aggressively because I wanted enough material to grind off so I didn't have any cavities. So the welds have a very high crown, as you can tell. I also needed to create a bridge to the transmission mount. The instructions on this kit were fairly poor, to say the least. For some of the reinforcements, I used some of those bits I chopped off the car so they still had the Ford part numbers, which I thought was pretty cool. And there we go. There's the reinforcement rails. These should make a pretty substantial difference in how the car handles and how the power gets transferred to the rear. No surprise, but the battery box, as they always are, was full of holes. I debated on repairing it, but the replacement was very reasonably priced and easy to replace. I didn't exactly try to replicate the factory way of doing it, but it looked pretty close. I also filled the grease hole fittings on the shock towers. This was a pretty popular modification in the past to get to the Zerk grease fittings, but as I have the 90-degree angled Zerk fittings from Open Track Racer, these holes were filled. I am lacking footage of the primer. I had to focus on timing as I had to move very quickly. For the bare metal, I use a 2-part epoxy primer. It doesn't require an acid etch and encapsulates any rust that I may have missed. It's also extremely tough. Moving to the seam sealer. It's used anytime 2 pieces of metal join together or overlap. There are also a lot of opinions about what to seam seal, what to leave. As far as I'm concerned, I'm in a desert climate. I'm sealing everything and leaving the factory drain holes. After reading endless debates on the forum, I did the best I could and made the best decisions I could while I was doing the seam sealing. Not the best footage here. All I really have is my phone. Again, I had to move very quickly and not worry too much about the camera and setup. Ultimately, this is about the restoration. I likely should have set up some cameras on the roof corners to capture a wide-angle shot, but past me didn't think of it. A lot of these shots are going to be with the car inverted. It's just a lot easier to get the footage and film that way without trying to light the underbody. As the warning suggests, this footage is awful. I thought a point of view camera would be the easiest way to do it, so I'm using a GoPro on my head. Again, I had no time to mess around with the camera while I'm painting because this stuff has a pot life of around 30 minutes. In other words, it turns to solid rock in 30 minutes. So you've got to be really quick. Even an attempt to manage a camera would have probably caused disastrous results. So this is what we have. I would not be upset if anybody fast forwarded through this. It's really hard to watch. It's nauseating. As I was editing it, it's not terrible in real time, but a roller coaster ride sped up. It's a pretty awful time lapse. But here we go. For the interior and the trunk, I went with a single stage paint, exact same manufacturer as the exterior, except for this particular paint was a single stage version. In other words, no clear coat. Honestly, I didn't need to do this. None of this will be visible. All this is covered by sound deadening material as well as other bits and carpet. Obviously, I had to cover it with something, and this was a really good opportunity for me to see what the color would look like with a black primer. Here's a shot of the underbody with primer again over the seam sealer. I used silicone plugs to deal with all the bolt holes and taped off any bits that would have had mounting points. I also did a soft roll where the bed liner stops and the engine bay paint starts. You'll never see it, but I didn't want any sort of opportunity for it to chip on a hard edge. I'm using an epoxy-based bed liner material to do the undercoating, which is controversial. Some people don't like it. Some people prefer the factory asphalt-based method. Some people love the undercoating. I'm going this route. As is the theme with this build and the other decisions I'm making, this is the way I want to do it. I'm not trying to build a factory car, after all. There will certainly be some more of these controversial decisions to follow. I did use a total of 4 liters of the bed liner. I thought 1 coat was adequate. It went on pretty good. It sprayed a lot more consistently and a lot easier than I thought it would. The process was very forgiving. I was also able to get into deep crevices under the torque box with this spray tool. I was pretty worried about it before I started. I didn't think I was going to be able to get any material in there, but this stuff gets everywhere. I had no problem getting into all the places that I wanted it to go, and surprisingly, didn't get into too many places that I didn't want it to go. I did use that cardboard flag to keep it from getting on the ceiling, but it mostly landed on the car. One of the many criticisms of the bed liner is it isn't very flexible. I don't think with the chassis reinforcements I'm going to see a lot of movement in the body, so I feel pretty comfortable. One thing you might not be able to tell, and I've got some close-up shots of it later, the rear end that I'm using is a narrowed Ford 8.8 Explorer rear end. It's got a completely different way of dealing with the emergency brakes, so I had to move all the emergency brake termination points forward. The Explorer uses an encased cable rather than an exposed cable to the back. On the frame reinforcements, you'll see 2 cradles on each side that I can zip tie the line to, as well as terminate a point in the front for the end of the cable. Those termination points were on the very rear where the frame arch begins. Those have been moved forward, and where those parts were, I put a 3-bolt plate so I could then fabricate another mount when I get a final dimension on the rear end. So that will be a future episode. I'm not sure this was the smartest way to do it, but I had to make some sort of decision on how to get that emergency brake to work before I undercoated, because I really don't want to do this undercoating twice. I think this gives me the most flexibility. If I have to fix it later, I'll sort it out later. Let me know in the comments if this format is better or worse. If this is the right direction to go, I'll focus more on it. Finally, here's the final result.